Welcome to the channel. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're going to be looking at a watch from Citizen. And I'm not hugely into Citizen watches, but I have dabbled with them now and again. I've owned and reviewed the more premium line, the NB series, and compared them with the likes of the Seiko Saab. And I've also looked at more budget options as I picked one out for my granddad, and now I've got this in hand. Now this was just an impulse buy, but that one reason I bought this is because it has some real historical significance. This is called the Kuroshio 64 reissue. And Kuroshio is where this significance is based. And it goes back to 1959. Citizen actually created the world's first Japanese water-resistant or waterproof watch, which this reissue is based on. They aptly named it the Parawater, prior to which water resistance was specific to high-end Swiss watches and not readily available to the masses. Now the way they achieved all this was by simply adding rubber O-rings to the case back and within the crown tube, and they achieved a water resistance of 50 meters. And they also sold them at a very fair and affordable price. So this was a huge step for the affordable watch market, allowing your average Joe to own one. Now for me, this is where both Citizen and Seiko will forever hold a major part in watch history, as both of these Japanese watch companies have really impacted the watch game historically. Now the reason Kuroshio is significant, back in 1963, Citizen formed a performance test in line with the Marine Research Institute and the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force. Now without going into lengthy specifics on the test, which is easily obtainable on Citizen's website as other sources, they basically over the course of a year sent out 140 watches in small yellow buoys, which is where the watchbox gets its inspiration from. And this was to test durability and performance. Now this was then further extended to another 47 watches in 1964, right into the Kuroshio Current, which actually flows past Taiwan and the southeast coast of Japan, which is where Kuroshio 64 comes from. Now wherever these watches were found, they were checked and found to be working. Which brings us to this reissue. And unlike Seiko, who these days are reissuing anything into anything, I don't believe Citizen has the same approach, so a reissue is a little bit more significant. What you also need to consider is this is the watch that set up the dive watches we saw in the 70s. Once Citizen introduced this O-ring concept, it set up a race into who can have the highest water rating. So down to the watch itself, of course it's going to have the same vintage design cues used on the original, which is why the case shape is this particular way, along with those long pointy lugs, and of course that crystal style and the dolphin hands and those markers. But being released in 2020, it means it's been upgraded, but not as well as you might think. The first thing which was changed is the dimensions. This one comes in at a diameter of 41 millimeters with a 13 millimeter thick case, lug to lug of 48.7 millimeters and a lug width of 20 mil. Now on the specifications, the water resistance is still only 50 meters. Talk about an actual reissue. Now they've also stuck to that mineral glass for the curved edge double dome crystal. You've also got no screw down crown, but you do have a screw down case back. But you do get an upgraded movement to the 8315 caliber, which is the same as the 8200 series, with a bit more refinement on the movement and a hearty 60 hours of power reserve. They've also gone with some subtle design upgrades. The dial comes with a very discreet embossing, which is meant to signify the ocean currents. And admittedly, the black dial isn't the best one to showcase this pattern. In fact, I didn't even know it had a pattern until I saw it in the particular light. They do have another 4 colors. You've got a deep blue, a deep green, a silvery white and a beige. Now on the dial, they've also added some lume to the hands and given the markers some crisp faceting, brushing the top facet and giving you polished bevels all around to give you that 3D impression. You'll notice the markers are very crisp. It does bring that design up to date slightly, and then you've got that polished Citizen logo, which does disappear depending on how the light is hitting the dial. Now the lume used is also adequate. I mean, it's not amazing and neither does it blow your mind. It's just normal. The lume dots around the markers and of course on the hands. It does last a while and it is quite solid, but this is what's expected of a giant OEM. Now I think you could argue for something released in 2020, the specs are a little dated. And I think this was obviously done on purpose as to highlight that reissue. Just as the water resistance should tell you this. I mean, we've got Chinese brands like Tandorio giving us 200 meters on a £50 dive watch. Also, let's now bring in Seiko. Their 1959 Seiko L'Oreal, which was their third sports watch. Both these watches have some visual similarity, and both were actually made in 1959. The Seiko reissue was highly specified with that 6L35 movement, sapphire, etc. But at the same time, a ridiculous price tag of around £3,000. Now this Kuroshio 64 reissue is a mere £250 to £300, and compared to the Parawater, they've done a faithful reissue. Now the casework has also been created in a way that it is still balanced between the vintage and the modern. The case, lugs and shape has been maintained as they were on the original, but you've got a higher degree of finishing. You've got soft linear brushing along the lugs and same with the sides. Now the side brushing distinguishes that vintage side profile. It makes it look quite thin along the side, but also showcases that large bubble crystal. The case also has a small recess to allow the crown to tuck into it slightly. Pretty easy to use as you have some clearance at the case back to pull the crown out. You also get a sloped bezel which is polished, and it is quite slim to complement that large dial area. You then get a rather strange bracelet. I mean, it's got a fantastic fit and finish between the lugs. And while there isn't female end links, you get a very dramatic drop down from the second link, but it's the actual links for me. They have made them quite gappy. They're all H links, and they've got a center connecting piece featuring that polished bar along the top. But they've made it in a way, I think again, to give it that vintage feel or effect. There is a lot of rattle and flex in that bracelet, and perhaps they did do this on purpose, going back to the whole reissue mentality, and then trying to basically recreate this feeling when this watch is worn. The bracelet does have quite smooth brushing, it's quite consistent, and then the clasp used is a simple fold over 2 micro adjustment clasp with those stamped formed internals which you get on like entry level Seikos. Now you can also see that exhibition case back, slightly decorated 8215 movement. You see the striping and some blued screws. Now here's how the watch sits on wrist. Now unfortunately I'm not going to size it because it does use pin and collar, and honestly I don't have the patience for pin and collar anymore, so instead I'll hold it tight so you get the idea. Now it does actually fit surprisingly well. It's definitely a larger diameter. It seems bigger than 41 because how that slim bezel really accentuates that domed crystal, giving a large surface area. And there's not much case thickness around that, but that lug to lug means it still sits just right for the smaller wrists. Now, as I said, had this been in white or the deep blue or the green, I think it would have really popped on the wrist and looked a lot better. I don't think this black dial does this watch many favors. Now, the bracelet, yes, it does give that, as people say, that vintage charm, and I get that. And I think it's the same thing as a Seiko 5 or a SNSX. You get that rattly bracelet, but on wrist, it is quite comfortable. Overall, the watch does come across as really well built with the improved finishing and better movement. And what I think they should have also done is put the Parawater also on the dial. I think it would have been nice to see. But as it stands, the price isn't too bad. You've actually got a fair bit of historical significance with this watch. So that's it from me. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you on the next video.